30 years ago, I took a flight from Havana to Frankfurt in Germany. I was then almost 28 years old. I had spent my whole life under the same regime, the same supreme leader. I never made it into Germany. In the stop in Madrid, I left the airport and then requested political asylum. In my asylum interview, I spoke about censorship and persecution, but I never mentioned a cause of the most persistent suffering in Cuba, hunger. Because at that time, I couldn't explain the connection between hunger and oppression. Because in Cuba, in addition to food, we lack words. For example, we didn't say crisis, we say special period. And we didn't say democracy, we say capitalism. And we couldn't call the regime by any other name than revolution. But in Cuba, in order to play safe, to avoid problems, you have to follow a simple rule. Don't contradict the supreme leader. But there was a catch. The supreme leader was too easy to contradict. He has strong and crazy ideas about everything. Politics, sports, medicine, cars, cars, yeah. And you can call him, but his most accurate definition, a dictator. Reinaldo Arenas, a Cuban writer, said that the difference between capitalism and socialism was that in capitalism, when they kick your ass, you could scream. But under socialism, when they kick your ass, you have to applaud. In Cuba, in the 90s, we got out of a lot of ass kicking in the form of deprivation of everything. But we can protest because we have to applaud or at least keep quiet. You have to understand something about totalitarian regimes. They work not because they are efficient, but the contrary. They know how to use all the poverty they create in order to better control people. Because poverty, hunger, produce feeling as conformity, fear, envy. Perfect feelings to manipulate people's mind. They just have to call those feelings by magical words like resilience, sacrifice, social justice, equality. But now I understand what I know in my asylum interviews. Hunger and destitution are tools for oppression. But in Cuba, I was lucky. First, I could write and make fun of the government and spread my writings around in many ways. And second, I was in love. And there is nothing like love to survive anything. But love and writing weren't enough. We have to escape. And then we escape. But then I realized that I wasn't completely free. On one side, I had left my family behind as hostages. And I found that people in the free world insisted in calling my dictatorship the revolution. So I was still a prisoner of that word. That's why I became an activist. Because fighting for other rights, I was fighting for my own freedom. But I encountered a lot of resistance, not just from the regime supporters, but from many Cubans in exile who didn't think that it's worth fighting for people who didn't fight for themselves. And non-Cubans reduce all the Cuban problems to its relation with the United States. When they talk about Cuba, they in fact were talking about U.S. embargo. But finally, on July 11 of 2021, all the question of why Cuban didn't fight for themselves became obsolete. That day, tens of thousands of Cubans flooded the street across the country in the largest demonstration against any government in Cuban history. And then, what was the world reaction? To attribute the Cuban desperation to the U.S. embargo. Meanwhile, the regime arrested the most notorious dissidents, as José Daniel Ferrer, the artist Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, and Michael Osorbo, a rapper who won 2 Grammy Awards while in prison. Along with them, the regime arrested hundreds of Cubans and sentenced them to 10 or 20 years in prison, including teenagers and mothers of young children. Such is the case of Lisandra Góngora, a mother of 5 who was sentenced to 14 years in a prison far from her family. And the repression continues. Last year, Mayerín Rodríguez Prado was sentenced to 15 years in prison just for filming a protest. And José Daniel Ferrer and Félix Navarro, who were released in January, thanks to negotiations with Vatican, were returned into prison just after the Pope's death. And the world remained silent, as if after 6 decades, the Cuba situation had become part of a landscape. And there is some truth in that. Now Cuba is less a country and more a landscape. A few months after the protests of 2021, the Cuban regime, in alliance with the Nicaragua's dictatorship, create an escape route that led to the largest exodus in Cuban history. That exodus was a great business for both regimes. Just for the ticket from Havana to Managua, each person had to pay $3,500 and then undertake a strenuous journey through Central America and Mexico to the American border. Now you can say that the country is abandoning the island. When I left Cuba 30 years ago, the country has a population of more than 11 million inhabitants, and now it has less than 9 million. Before all this happened, I started to write a book entitled Our Hunger in Havana. It was my attempt to prevent that the crisis of the 90s will be forgotten. But at that time, Cubans were living in a far worse reality than I describe in my book. Now, the Cubans have the government, despite of this reality, the government feels victorious because they have defeated imperialism once again. But when they say imperialism, they actually mean the desire of Cubans to be free and prosperous in their own country. Now the most creative and enterprising Cubans live in exile, while the most courageous and rebellious ones are held in prison by the government who is waiting for the right moment to exchange them for some political advantage. Now the image from Cuba, the most revealing image from Cuba, barely contains human beings. On one side, you have mountains of garbage that invade Cuban streets. On the other, brand new hotels built by the military oligarchy. Now the nation is dying, but the regime remains strong thanks to the support of capitalist companies and of tyrannies around the world. You can expect that the regime voluntarily give up its power. And even in a small part of it, in the form of respect for basic human rights. But we can exert pressure on the regime. And all the companies that support the regime, as the Spanish Meliá or the Canadian Blue Diamond. Now, you and me, can show our solidarity for all the people who are in prison just for defending the same right we here take for granted. We can demand their unconditional release and send all the help they need to survive the horrific conditions they are suffering. And we can do something more. We can change the way the Cuban regime is perceived. Now, when I take an Uber, if I say where I'm from, the drivers don't respond by default, oh, Cuba, Fidel, Cuba, revolution. But we need more. We need the people around the world understand what the regime is about and who are the really Cuban heroes. We hope that someday the driver of Uber drivers say, Cuba, a dictatorship. Cuba, Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara. And then maybe Cuba Libre will be more than just the name of the drink. Let's work for that. Viva Cuba Libre. De Acanel Singao.